I'm glad you bring up traditional versus new thinking. One thing I've been really dying to ask you is, I saw recently that you tweeted about a campaign that BMW, again, we're turning to car companies, it's not deliberate.
No,
BMW Activate the Future. It's a series of 4 documentaries, it's only just begun, but again, the rationale behind it is, I suppose, to drive wider discussion within the industry, and of course, discussion from fans and listeners out there involved in the car industry, and of course potential customers. At the same time, I saw this week a tweet from Social Media Week in London where there was a figure that something like a double-digit decline in newspapers, which is, you know, perhaps more of a traditional model, I suppose, for those in the industry of PR. There are kind of 2 forces at play here, the new media relations and the old media relations, and I know we could probably talk about this for hours, but in a nutshell, at the crux of it, what do you see as the interaction so far, and perhaps for this year, where do you see that relationship between traditional and new media relations going, with social media particularly?
I'd like to comment on the BMW one, and you might have to refresh me on the second question, but
sure.
I think the BMW is an interesting one because it's about content, is what they're providing, and a platform. And social media is involved, but I don't see it as so much a social media campaign. I don't like campaigns using the word with social media. I think it's a commitment, and it's not a one-night stand, as I heard someone say. It's a longer-term commitment, but it's really about content, and we're starting to see these terms come out. We're starting to see inbound marketing, which means attracting people to you. We're seeing content marketing, which means that is a platform, and they're doing film and they're creating content. The fact that the social media channels are distribution channels for it, and then people talk about it, that's part of that. And then David Meerman Scott, the author of the New Rules of Marketing and PR, he talks about real-time marketing. So all of these new terms coming out, they kind of, social media is there and in it, but there are other areas of thought. So what we do in PR is create communications platform. You can't just keep talking about your products, but you've got to have a stake in the sand and talk about something a bit bigger picture. People, you know, talk about the industry you're in, or trends, or opinion, thought leadership sort of stuff. So that's what BMW is trying to do. So predictions. So I'll just digress slightly, but predictions between for new media and old media, you're saying?
Yeah, for 2011, the interplay between perhaps traditional and new media relations, how do you see that working and social media playing a part?
Well, I thought that the double-digit drop, well, that was in the UK, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. I believe it was from a Hill and Knowlton London workshop. It was for social media.
Yeah, I suppose in a sense, we've in Melbourne, in Australia, we've got the Herald Sun, which is still very dominant and not really losing any readers. So I think we still need to be mindful, and I love newspapers from way back, so I don't want to see them die, but they will evolve. There's no doubt about that. I think we're in a time where we have to give people options. A lot of people still want the newspaper. People want it on the iPad, people want it online, and now everyone wants it on phones as well. So until that shakes up, there's going to be a lot of distribution methods, but you could almost tell though, if you're a newspaper proprietor, you'd be wanting to get it all online, because 80% of your costs is in print and distribution.
Absolutely.
So I don't see the papers going anywhere too quickly. It still sets the agenda to a large degree. I think TV's probably struggling a little bit more in a way. It's still the old sort of school programming, and it's still very ego driven, and it still clashes with the way people are starting to think on the social web, I think. Newspapers, I think, I think newspapers are in the best position because they've got a lot of journalists and they can reinvent. So radio hasn't got a lot of journalists, and TV really hasn't got a lot of journalists. But newspapers and magazines, or newspapers and magazines have. And they can reinvent because, you know, we see some of the ones, you know, the Herald Sun down here, they have, the sports guys have a daily 4 o'clock online TV program. So the journos have had to now become online, and they're liking it because they're becoming sort of multimedia, because they're on radio and they're on TV and they're on the web and all sorts of things. So I think newspapers are reasonably well. We will always need columnists or opinion leaders and journalists who can pull together a good story. I think we'll always have those. It just means the format's going to change. Is it going to change this year? Not really. I think iPad 2 is purported to be coming out in April. Does that change things? You've got a lot of other different tablet products coming out from other electronics brands. I think the tablet market's a really interesting one. It will change the newspapers in as much as, they'll probably have to add more video and more visuals and more photos, and it'll make it a much richer experience. So I reckon this year's going to be a bit of consolidation. I think we're going to. Social media's maturing a bit in Australia. Half the population, 9 million people, are on Facebook, and that's very active. That's mainstream now. A lot of these things are becoming mainstream to a degree, and I can't see anything apart from Cora, which came out of the blue.
It did.
And I'm still getting my head around. Some people are saying, is that the future of journalism? So that's an interesting one to look at. Look at Cora and see, well, how can that fit with the media? Bigger in the States than here. Same with Foursquare's bigger in the States than here, but we're adopting in Australia reasonably quickly. So I reckon this year's going to be one of consolidation. From a corporate perspective, PR, I reckon the PR industry is going to take a lot bigger steps in this space. I think it's great for our industry at the moment. We were probably a little bit slower to get in, maybe not in America, but certainly in Australia. The ad agencies and the digital agencies got in. But I think clients are realising that taking an advertising approach, doing a funky video and putting it out, a viral video, which you can't do, the public will decide what's viral, but there's a few brands that have been burnt with this sort of, let's do a social media campaign, do a video and put it out there, or crowdsource the ideas. And I think they've probably come to the realisation that it hasn't been all that effective, and that PR is probably the right discipline to lead a lot of it in the longer term. Doesn't mean you can't do campaigns over and above, but I'm of the school of thought where you build your community over time and then you have your campaigns. Because if you're not on and involved and you have a campaign, who are you speaking to?
Absolutely.
So good times ahead, I think, for our industry, and this year will be a year of consolidation.
Fantastic. Consolidation ahead. That's
Yep.
Trev's tip. That said, I'd like to go back, a conversation you and I had 12 months ago when we first met here in Melbourne.
Did I make a prediction then, and did it not come true? Or did
It was a prediction. I'll ask you whether you think it came true or not. You thought that 2010 would be the year the big business or the business got social media. Do you think, as a broad kind of prediction, that came
Very
true
broad.
from an Australian perspective, or are there still people getting it before we consolidate?
Okay, I think that's not a bad prediction. No, I think it was pretty safe that, as I said, it was a watershed year, and I think in terms of that's the public getting into it. It's not being a little digital geeky thing, but it's pretty broad and mainstream. And with that, those same people also work in companies, and the companies are becoming savvier. So I think probably the year before, 2009 particularly, it was a lot of, let's jump into it, we've got to be on Twitter, we've got to be on Facebook, and there's a bit of that now still, but really I think most of the companies have gone through that phase, and that was a phase. They got on, is that all there is? So then they get on and they're not getting any results because they're not active in it. They start a blog, they don't do anything about it, and it's sitting there dead. There's been no thought, it's been very tactical. Last year, I believe, just through reading, seeing case studies, seeing people from in-house talking a bit more about it, and anecdotally, with what we've done at Edelman and what I did prior to Edelman, companies are, I use the word enlightened, they're opening their eyes a little bit more to it, they're becoming more pragmatic about it, and they might not have been jumping as much, but they were probably taking a little bit more of a strategic approach to it. So it might have taken them a little bit of time. They probably realised that we're not ready. I mean, I've been talking to one client and they're really keen to get going, but they've realised after we've sort of spoken to them that, well, we need to probably step back and get a few more people across the line. So that to me is good because they're not just rushing in, but there's a thought process, and it's across the management and customer service and different marketing and PR and across different parts of the business. And I reckon there's been a lot more of that. So when I say consolidation is, I think the moves that have happened in 2010 will continue on. This is on Australia I'm talking about. Greater acceptance and a bit more thought put into it from a corporate level.
And it all makes for an extremely exciting time for social media and PR in Australia ahead this year.
Well, it does. It does indeed.
Trevor Young, again, thank you so much.
No problem.
It's been an absolute pleasure having you as our inaugural guest on PRTV from Down Under. If you'd like to connect with Trevor and kind of join in his conversations, I'd encourage you to do so. His blogs are The PR Warrior and, of course, Sweat Equity. You can also reach him online at Twitter, at Trevor Young or at PR Warrior, and of course on his blogs you can find the links to all his multitude of social media platforms. Yes. Trevor, thanks again.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thanks all for watching. Until next time on the next episode of PRTV from Down Under, we'll look forward to seeing you then.
Thank you.